party of 15 explorers venture towards unknown lands. Their goal is clear: to find the Great Salt Lake. The challenges of traversing the Sierra Nevada desert have proven costly to them, but they have marched on, being led by fearless 28-year-old explorer Jebediah Smith. Recently, he had been freed from custody in the Spanish-controlled California, and his party has now entered into another desert. A wasteland so vast, yet so marveling, it went unappreciated due to the party's current feeble situation. They would continue to traverse across this plain, sacrificing their horses and all perishables in order to just make it. By the time they had made it to the Great Salt Lake, it was a grand occasion, Smith stating it was, quote, a joyous sight. Whilst their celebration that day was due to the incredible discovery that most likely saved their lives, they would also cement an achievement that many would set to covet just a century later: crossing the Bonneville Salt Flats. Two years after the death of Jebediah Smith, Captain Benjamin Bonneville set out on his own expedition. He had much better financing, 110 men instead of the previous 15, and he also had the knowledge to build upon. The exploration would become many of these men's life's work. Field Lieutenant Joseph Walker would lead his group into the north side of the fabled Salt Flats, charting the first maps of the area. It was at this point that in his explorations, the area would gain its name, the Bonneville Salt Flats. And perhaps a classic historic irony, the man the place is named after was on his own expedition at the time, most likely never even seeing the place that has carried his name for nearly 150 years past his death. Over the next couple decades, explorations would continue, or perhaps the most notable being the Hastings Pass charting across the Salt Flats. For those who know a bit of frontier history, you can conclude that yes, the Donna Reed party did venture across this barren stretch of land, scattering countless pieces of debris as they suffered to their demise. Much of the leftover parts or put across the Salt Flats were found in 1936, and even their tire tracks were discovered and photographed in 1986. Through the suffering that ensued for the first travelers of the Salt Flats, the Hastings Pass did get easier to traverse. Interest in Salt Flats did become stagnant, however, as many of the crossings were spotty and unkept, only having 3 on record by the time of the late 19th century. By that point, the Industrial Revolution was taking a hold of every aspect of human life. Print media was selling faster than hotcakes, and prominent publisher William Randolph Hearst was taking full advantage of it. To say Hearst was a sensationalist would have been an understatement. For those who may not know of the early years of yellow journalism, this guy was the master of early 20th century clickbait, and what better way to pull off a stunt to draw attention to his new Hearst Communications publishing company than by challenging a man to bike across the Bonneville Salt Flats. It had been nearly 50 years since the Donna Reed tragedy, and many knew the area, if at all, for that situation alone. A cursed swath of American land for any hopeful pioneer. Hearst found professional writer William Rochelle, or Big Bill as many called him, and he took up the opportunity in 1896, hopeful that the challenger, if completed, would only increase his status even more. This was all a grand plan by Hearst. After sending Reichel out, he was to take as much information as he could, along with other cyclists that he'd sent out across similar situations in the country, and create a network of bike paths, coalescing in Hearst's first ever Manifest Destiny bike relay. Reichel headed out and began surveying, taking common routes. He found many of the well-traversed paths too unfit for this biking extravaganza, and decided to think outside the box. Still charted, he went to the entrance of the Hastings Cutoff, thinking that while still incredibly dangerous, with advancements in technology and planning, this route could actually be feasible now. Before traversing the notorious path, he and friend Charlie Amise planned and calculated the journey. They eventually were dropped off in Terrace, Utah, and with some homemade sandwiches, a prospector map from the Terrace Railroad shop, along with 4 canteens, they began the journey. The first discovery in their journey came when they realized how easily it was to traverse on the hard, salty, flat plain with modern innovations. The tires would be almost free of all friction, being able to put effortless energy into crossing it quickly instead of actually traversing through mud or other obstacles. But they soon ran out of water, and they became stuck in a muddy part of the salt flats. Through finding a spring plotted on the map, they were able to survive and complete the journey the next morning. Their total time took about 22 hours. The first speed calculated on the salt flats. With the development of motor vehicles, 1898 saw some of the first actual recorded speed trials. Gaston de Châteauneuf-le-Bot went at an average speed of 39.24 miles an hour over 0.62 miles, or if you want to go by inferior standards of measurement, a kilometer. Caries, France, would host various speed trials over 1899, with Le-Bot developing his Junota Duke electric vehicle to reach 57.65 miles an hour by March. The 60-mile-an-hour barrier was broken in April, when Carhil Genetazzi took his first ever land speed designed vehicle to France. The record stood for 3 years until 1902, when France's Léon Chilipollet took a steam-powered vehicle to 75 miles an hour over another 0.62-mile run. That record stood for 4 months, as William K. Vanderbilt II headed to France with his new internal combustion engine and beat the record by a mile an hour. From there, internal combustion began to dominate, and up until 1903, Dodon, France would be the place that held the speed records. Belgium would take the honors, eclipsing 80 miles an hour for the first time there, but finally America would take hold of the record, measuring an actual mile instead of kilometers. Henry Ford at 91.37 miles an hour in his Ford 999 Racer. At this point, a war began in France. Belgium and America raged in speed, with French-born Louis Rigoli going to Belgium and setting a blistering 103.56 mile an hour speed run. Finally, in 1906, after minor step-ups in record speed, Fred Marriott went to Daytona Beach and set a 127.66 mile an hour speed across a kilometer, 18 miles an hour faster than anybody else up to that point, making it so the record could stand for 16 years, only being approached by various people running 1 mile times instead of the kilometer. At this time, something was starting in Bonneville. 10 years after the Trepid bike ride, Big Bill Rigel went back to the Salt Flats with 2 businessmen. He had never forgotten the fascination inspired by him by the vast swaths of flat land, and wanted to do a little more field studying. They came to the conclusion that not only was the Salt Flats impeccable for a railroad to be built across the area, but for motor vehicles. In 1910, the first permanent pathway was built across the Salt Flats. It was a railroad. And in 1914, racing great Teddy Tetzlaff came to Bonneville. He had garnered his nickname Terrible Teddy due to his abject abuse of motor vehicles. And Tetzlaff's mentality was by far the best for running speed trials. It was to never lift, and take his vehicles to and over the limit. After setting a supposed 100-mile run in 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 29 seconds, Tetzlaff took his 300 horsepower Blitzen Benz II to the flats on August 12, 1914. He would achieve a speed of 142.85 miles an hour, and it was clear to him and everyone that was in attendance that the Salt Flats were a prime place to try these speeds. But alas, the record was barely recognized nationally, let alone abroad. Many don't even know of this incredible run, as Big Bill Risel continued to push for the Salt Flats and the record to stand. By 1927, a railroad was constructed across the Salt Flats, and racing icon Ab Jenkins competed against a locomotive over 125 miles on the Salt Flats. Jenkins, after his run, saw the possibility of the area as well, and with others set up a circular course for which to attempt 24-hour speed records. Back in Europe, however, speed slowly rose more and more, and in the 1 mile and 1 kilometer runs, Fred Marriott's Daytona Beach record was finally snapped in 1922. Canelm Lee Guinness's record in England was held for a short period of time before it was obliterated by the great Rene Thomas in 1924, doing so in his homeland of France. But that record only stood for a year, as finally we stepped over the 150 mile an hour average By the time of the Jenkins train race in 1927, the 1-mile record had reached 174.88 miles an hour. Whilst the kilometer was now over 200, set at Daytona by Henry Seagrave, Daytona Beach was now known for the prime speed capital in the world. In March of 1929, Henry Seagrave went 231.446, a speed and run so phenomenal for that time, he would later be knighted in his home of England. Daytona would host the first speed over 250 miles an hour in a kilometer as well, as Malcolm Campbell became the king of speed after Seagrave. At Daytona, he would hit 276.816 miles an hour on the beaches, and many saw the golden number they were approaching, 300 miles an hour. On the beaches, Campbell had a 2,500 horsepower tilted Bluebird. It was 2,240 cubic inches and a V12 engine. It was primarily developed by Rolls-Royce, but still was over 23 miles an hour off the 300 threshold. The car was first developed in 1933, but it drastically changed over the last 2 years. After the 1933 runs, they widened the car and gave it a larger wheelbase, increasing its sleek nature. For the first time, they began working with the grip and handle of the car. Both Campbell and Railton knew the overall power matriculated was more than enough to achieve their goal of 300. They attached a double-wheel rear axle to it, along with splitting overall drive to independent wheels in the back. This allowed for total torque from the behemoth engine to disperse across 2 planes instead of the singular one, actually letting the power from the engine escape to the tires better. However, the wheelbase on the one side had to be shortened about 1.5 inches compared to the other to make this work. With the assumption that this perk would be greatly overcome by the new mechanical gains, they lastly added air brakes to the vehicle, and a lever to deploy a flap that would actually close the radiator intake for a short period of time during the run. It would streamline the car even more. And with all of these advancements, they went and made the 276 run as mentioned before. But Campbell was very displeased. He knew he could go faster. He sensed that the car was greatly hampered by the waves and ruts of sand across Daytona Beach, and all they needed was just some place smoother than a beach. A place so flat, yet grippy, literally nothing could stop you. They had heard tales of a place out west so flat that speeds only seen by the human imagination could be reality. At 50 years of age, Campbell was what many considered ancient for his time. In contrast, Henry Seagrave, the last great British star to ascend to world culture fame, died in his speed runs at only 33 years old. This was a dangerous business, and nearly every man from Campbell's homeland of England had perished doing these runs. But for some reason, he still stood tall. And perhaps he wondered why. Perhaps he didn't. Even the bravest men have to face their mortality at some point, and standing on the precipice of attempting to go faster than anyone before, by a considerable margin, perhaps this might be too much. Never had someone gone to these strange lands to do this, to leave the sanctity of Daytona, France, or even England, and roar a car at those speeds. But as Campbell climbed into the car on September 3rd, 1935, he charged this challenge head on. The feeling of over 1,200 horsepower behind you, the efforts of countless men, and all you see ahead of you is nothing. Such a plane of abject nothingness that the curvature of the very world you dare to be taken from is visible. Like he had done countless times before on the beaches, they counted down, and then it was time to go. As Campbell screeched the Bluebird across the ancient salt, white crystals pinged off the car's beautiful blue paint. Body panels creaking and shaking as the might of the V12 pushed it to speeds now over 250. Campbell, relentless, kept pushing, astonished by the absolute calmness and handling. As the might of over 1,000 horsepower shrieked across the ancient sea, Campbell found himself in a state of calm, peace. Following the tar-black guiding line strung through the salts, in that moment, the doubt of his mortal limits were vanquished. The aspirations and dreams of countless engineers feeling achieved in this one simple run. As timing clicked in the official time on tape, the men watched in triumph and read the speed. 299.875. An eighth of a mile an hour off his dream. Campbell, disheartened, didn't give in, and he dared fate a second time, putting his precious mortality on the line for another run, but this one only read 295.566. Campbell was ready to try again and take a couple days off, but the next day it was found the machine read improperly. At the news of this, he groaned, remembering the time at Daytona where the machine originally read 304, but in reality they found it to be only 276. He was well acquainted with errors that dropped his records down even lower than what he wanted. But this time, it was a coronation. The coronation of the first man to go 300 miles an hour on land. The odyssey of his 5-mile-a-minute goal had been accomplished. 301.337. Unlike the Teddy Tetzlaff run of 20 years prior, Campbell's run reverberated through not only Tooley County, but the entire world. The odyssey of his 5-mile-a-minute run, in a place unheard of at the time, attracted the attention of every speedrunner to the empty plain. They were hoping to build their own legacies there, and Campbell went off to the water and ran speed records there, being complacent with his land record that he had achieved. It stood there for 2 years, until George Easton took his Thunderbolt Rolls-Royce to the Salt Flats and shot down the run by the Bluebird, 311.420. Easton was confident that he could go faster with his Rolls-Royce developed machine, but he wasn't alone in his fascinations. Brit John Cobb was a motoring star, building his name through racing. By the end of the 1930s, his primary focus had shifted to speedrunning. With the backing of genius designer Real Railton behind him, who had stepped away from Rolls-Royce after Campbell had retired, he designed his own car for the first time, with John Cobb as driver. They schemed their first ever design, and what simply was called the Railton. They took it to Bonneville for 1938, and the Thunderbolt would also return to the Salt Flats, bringing to the quiet ancient lake the first battle of speed over the land speed record. Both the Thunderbolt and the Railton carried two V12 engines as their source of main power, the Thunderbolt being the Rolls-Royce Type R V12 engines, whilst the Railton used Napier Lion W12 engines, lent to them by Marion Calstairs, a prolific boat racer for the time. The output for the Thunderbolt was 2,350 horsepower. The Railton was 2,700 horsepower. The Railton team had the power advantage, but the energy still needed to be transferred to the wheels. Their solution? To split each engine into its own drive shaft, feeding all four wheels drive power. Something incredibly unconventional for the time, to achieve a speed run at least. Would it be a disadvantage? Railton thought not. His car designed almost like a bubble just off the surface of the ground. The Thunderbolt looked how it sounded, like a bullet of steel set to scream across the salts. As the two cars descended on Bonneville, so did Easton and Cobb. Both were set to cap off their racing careers with tackling at the time was the most hallowed record. Whilst many favored the Railton, since it was a newer car, the Thunderbolt had been greatly updated since the year prior. It went first, screaming the machine over the salts and achieving a record of 374 miles an hour. Under verification, though, it was ruled not the case. The primitive radar system used for calculating speed was not able to adequately read off the Thunderbolt due to a giant glint it generated with its polished aluminum body. The Thunderbolt team was furious by the situation and pulled the car back in for work. 2 hours later, the entire car was black. With no light being able to reflect off it, the first recorded speed from the Thunderbolt was posted. 345.5. A bone-shattering shot and jumping speed for Cobb and Railton to achieve. The Rolls-Royce team had taken the ball and moved it further than anyone could have imagined. In a few days of preparation, the Railton made its run. 350.2. The first speed war had officially begun. Easton the next day climbed back in and immediately went out and hit 357.5. The Railton had to submit. It wouldn't be until the next year in 1939 the war would pick back up. Cobb would fire a 369.7 and challenge the British-built machine to best it. However, as the Thunderbolt prepared itself, it would never actually get the opportunity to go out and beat the time. Once the war started, the speed wars ended, turning Bonneville to its quiet nature it had not been away from for more than 3 decades. John Cobb, during this time, would join the Royal Air Force and help the Allied cause in World War II. And after 7 years of service and winning the war, he would leave being a squadron leader and head back with Railton to the Salt Flats. By the time they returned, it was 1947. And similar to other sporting venues of the time after World War II, the Speed Weeks event had all but vanished. But on September 16th, Cobb made a run to ensure it was only a hiatus. He would create the first ever single run over 400 miles an hour, setting the land speed record. Cobb had achieved the moniker of fastest man alive and carried it proudly in the media as he moved to water speed runs. It would also be a moniker he would never see be taken from him.
Time and again, Cobb made the run, striving, as he had done throughout his life, for new honors in the world of speed. Then one day we read that he had touched 185 miles an hour, and we were certain he would do it. Afternoon on the day that was to be his last, Cobb took the Crusader along the measured mile again, faster and faster until he was traveling at 240 miles an hour. And then, there on the waters of Loch Ness, John Cobb was found. The glories that he had won during his lifetime were not for himself, but for his country. For John Cobb was, above all, a great Englishman.
Over the next 10 to 15 years, the Bonneville Speed Weeks grew. Various categories of records became available, and all sorts of teams, manufacturers, and drivers came there to try their own attempts, to set various records, and to continue to up the ante with one another. One thing that Bonneville had done over its early years was to avoid the worst aspect of motor racing. That was until September 2nd, 1955. John Donaldson would lose his life attempting to break a speed record, becoming the first man to die on the Salt Flats officially, running speed record runs. Through the growth of Speed Weeks, no one approached the records set by Cobb in 1947. 1960 seemed to finally be the year, though. Hometown hero Ethel Graham and his car titled the City of the Salt Lake had what many thought was the ability to crack 400 miles an hour overall. The red machine took to Bonneville and roared across the salts, but the car would lose control and overturn. It would kill Graham as it flipped repeatedly over hundreds of feet. Newspapers reporting Graham's death titled his passing as the first during a Speed Weeks run in Bonneville, completely forgetting though about what had happened just 5 years prior. Graham had dumped countless hours into that machine, into his dream, and now that dream laid in a million pieces, strewn throughout the salts. Originally, he caught the itch when he was a boy. watching his hero Malcolm Campbell speared across these forbidding lands. He tasted it again, being a volunteerman on Cobb's efforts in the 40s, learning and understanding what it took to go where no man has gone before. He thought it was destiny, that he could be the man to finally take the throne and crack 400, to take the claim to his local town just nearby. Instead, fate claimed Graham. A sad reminder that for every pioneer who pushed the limits, 100 more have fell before the start. In 1962, the roar of cylinders and pistons was flooded with another sound. 3 new vehicles roared into Bonneville, all holding a J-47 General Electric jet engine. Physician Nathan Ostich took his flying Caduceus to 331 miles an hour, setting a tone to the crowd that in these otherworldly vehicles, Cobb's record could be obliterated. Next it was Glenn Leisure in his Infinity, who on September 10th took to the salts. Accidents were nothing new to speedruns, especially on those lands, but now at speeds of over 400 miles an hour, survivability of these accidents was at a new low. Leisure's death hung over the future runs heavily. The only man it didn't seem to faze, though, was young SoCal driver Craig Breedlove. Craig was the pilot of the 3rd jet-powered car there, titled Spirit of America. After some trial runs in 1962, he returned for 1963, ready to do what no one else had done yet on those salt flats.
On Monday morning, I was quite surprised by the number of people that were actually out there. They were asking me if I thought I'd break the record and if I was nervous, which of course I was. We had run 87% throttle the day before, and I had decided to run 90% this morning. I didn't know how fast the car would go at this setting. I knew that the run would be pretty fast. I had gone over 400 miles an hour. In fact, I was asked, how fast do you think you went? And I said 425.
428.37, and the land speed record returns to America.
Breedlove left 1963 confident, but in 1964, when he returned to defend his title of fastest, competition was much stiffer. Enter the Arfon brothers. Walt and Art Arfons, whilst related, had deep disinterest in actually working together. Their feud had driven them to both build jet-powered speedsters, Walt using a Westinghouse J46 engine, one that could beat Breedlove's J47. Walt even test drove it himself, but crashed. And whilst the accident didn't claim his life, thankfully, he suffered a heart attack during it, leaving him unable to drive for the rest of his life. He called designer and driver Tom Green, a man who had never raced a vehicle over 150 miles an hour. He hopped in the Jetster and did something absolutely unbelievable. He beat Breedlove. Walt and Tom had the title now at 413 miles an hour. And 3 days later, on the 5th of October, Art made his run. The Green Monster, as Art called it, used a J79 General Electric jet engine for the price of only $600. He'd done guesswork building it, calling GE for a manual, and they declined to give it to him. The product of his guesswork, 434.03 miles an hour. Now the Breedlove team was baffled. The Spirit of America had found itself in between the battle of brothers. Two men determined to grab the record back and forth, and to do almost anything to keep it for themselves. On October 13th, Breedlove elevates the record to 468.719. Craig immediately climbed back in again, shortly after, damned and determined to go 500 miles an hour.
Craig knows that he is within reach of an over 500-mile-an-hour record. What he doesn't know is that this is going to be the wildest ride of his life.
Moving out. He's on course, looking good. Here he comes, moving fast. He's past the 8 and really standing on it. He's looking good. He's roaring. He's coming into the mile. He's really moving. He's out of the mile. I see his smoke trail. Something came off of the car. He lost his chute. He lost his chute.
And he's going too fast for his brakes to hold. He's out of control.
He's in the 3, and he's not slowing down. He's approaching the 2. Man, he's really moving. He's past the 2. He's out of control. I see him coming. He's coming. He's moving right along. He's really pouring it on. Here he comes. He's going close to the first line up to the putter. Approaching right now. Past the finishing line.
Spirit of America is on a runaway, sprinting farther and farther from the racecourse, and deeper into rougher parts of the flats. Breedlove sits as a passenger, helplessly steering his land-bound airplane to somewhere, anywhere, that could possibly save his life. He veered off track and hit a berm, and the Spirit of America dove into a water-filled part of the salts and sunk into the water. The team, family members, and media descended on the crash scene, expecting the worst. Instead, standing on the berm was Craig. The young driver had survived his dance with death, and full of adrenaline, he relived it to the people on scene.
Well, the first shoot I planted, I didn't, it just went to shreds. It felt good to a ribbon, and then I I waited for a while, tried to hit the brakes, and the brakes just wouldn't go. I pumped the brakes all the way down.
No brakes at all?
Nothing, no brakes at all. And then I hit my other chute, and nothing happened. Yeah, they did. And I didn't have any. I just took that steering, I turned it clear around like this, and it finally started brain coming around. I don't know whether the fin was hooked. Yeah, I know, I hit the pole.
With your right fin or what?
I just saw that pole coming, I just went just like that in the seat, and I hit the pole, and I thought I had it when I hit the pole. I saw that telephone pole coming, I said, oh, and I went like that, gritted my teeth. gritted my teeth, and that pole just sheared off like nothing, boom, and no pole. And I thought, oh boy, I got another chance. I looked up. I hit the water, that water started slowing me down. I seen this big old bank coming, I thought, oh no. I hit the bank and it just went right over the top there, and I just flying through there about 30 feet in the air, and I said, now I'm going to drown, Everything's okay. What else did I go, Devin? Did we break the record, God darn? What was the time? What was the time?
As the crew recovered the waterlogged Spirit of America, Art Arfon went out and destroyed Breedlove's record with a 536.710. It was with that, as water poured out of the cockpit, that they had won 1964.
Well, for my next
next trick.
You didn't make it. I'll set myself on fire.
A year passes by, and the Spirit of America returns to the place that nearly claimed her and their pilot. This time, the Spirit of America had a new J-79 jet engine inside, ready to ensure no one could displace her. Walt returned as well with his Wingfoot Express. His car held 25 jet-assisted takeoff rockets, a new theory on how to take on his speed. It would actually prove to only slow him down to a complacent 400 miles an hour. Not even close to cracking the record. Craig was able to snatch his record back, 555 miles an hour. Art heard the shot and drove the Green Monster hard, blowing a tire and crashing the beast, but officially accomplishing the record of 576. Craig turned and fired back again, with a milestone that became jaw-dropping. 600.601. Art tried, but he could not go faster. The Green Monster had been slain by the Spirit of America, locking itself in Breedlove into American icona at the height of its growth. The first man to achieve 400, 500, and 600 miles an hour. As Bonneville charged on, it would reach its silver anniversary. Celebration was aplenty. Hot rod culture ran rampant, with over 170 cars showing up to the flats, and a celebratory banquet was held for the event. The next year, however, something reared its ugly head for the first time. At the start line, it was the most visible. The salts had worn too thin. After a survey, the permit for special use was revoked. In a helpless attempt, the Utah State Highway Commission collected salts from the edges of the flats and dumped 500 tons of it into the thin spots on the racetrack. The surface was now brown, and the speed runs were able to continue temporarily. Motorcycles during this time marched on the salts in waves, and Don Vesco would set a motorcycle land speed record of 318.598. Vesco would then lend the bike to Marcia Hawley, who would set her own speed of 229 miles an hour. 1980, the record amount of entries for the Speed Weeks happened. 275. All fighting heavy rains or dealing with a shortened race course. This was primarily due to the damaged salts, which meant the land speed record could no longer be reached with such a short runway. Soon after, out in the Black Rock Desert, Richard Noble cracked the record, stealing it away from Bonneville for the first time in over 50 years, indicating a step in the decline of the salts. However, the hot rodder culture fought on through Bonneville, seeing a staggering 255 entries in 1989. But unlike times before, rain drowned out much of the hype. The Speed Week ceremonies began to taper more and more, fighting the thinning surface year after year. Through the 1990s, records became sparser, the entries less and less. But the fantasy of the salts, the salt fever, lured the curious in. One temptation was the hollowed 200-mile-an-hour club, a prestigious group of men and women who have taken the chance and successfully made a run north of 200 miles an hour. There are no other requirements to join this club, no other stakes, just as long as you can crack 200 on those ancient salts. The club still marches on to this day, creating legends of motorsports year after year. And thus we sit in the present day, the barren, flat strip of salt sitting dormant in the Utah desert. For a casual visitor, there is nothing to see, no emotion to feel, just a stare into the salty abyss that sits before them. Before the hot rodder, the jet fuel junkie, the racer. It is more than nothing. This empty void has laid host to human accomplishment, bravery, innovation, and sacrifice. The racer can see all these things, feel them, and know that while these ancient salts sat for a millennium before him, the short burst of a century of aspiration leaves a mark that will never be forgotten. Perhaps that racer, when he visits the Bonneville Salt Flats, will smile, consume the possibility that many before him did, and maybe even shed a tear for the men that came there just like him, all with the same dream: to conquer the fastest place on Earth.